My name is Christopher Lee, and I will be chairing this session on accessibility leadership. And boy, do we have some leaders on stage today. Truly, this is kind of full circle, if you think about it, from this morning, when Caroline Casey came up on stage and she talked about this top-down executive approach, about getting the boards to buy in, the 500 level, the valuable 500. And here we have on stage individuals that really have their feet on the ground. They know what that's like. And we have an amazing opportunity to kind of get into their heads a little bit. Now, I have to tell you that my background academically is psychology. So if I start asking weird questions, just pull back on me. So this is a good time for us to really explore. Now, we're going to start off with a video. Jenny Flurrie from Microsoft couldn't be here. And so we definitely want to bring that in just a moment. But after this video, I'll be posing some questions to the group about their thoughts about leadership and accessibility. We'll do introductions, but this time I'm going to throw a couple other questions, because I know a couple of you have been on stage earlier today. And then we'll open it up for the group. How does that sound to everyone? Good? All right. Let's open it up with Jenny's video.
Hi there, folks. I'm Jenny Flurrie, Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft, and I'm really sorry that I'm not there in my hometown. I will be thinking of you this week, but I was asked to pop a few thoughts on video, and specifically some thoughts about how to build on really our learnings of how to build an ecosystem that is inclusive of accessibility in a company and framework like ours. And I'd say we're on a journey with it first. I would say we're nowhere near a goal or a destination. In fact, I think if you ever feel like you've achieved your destination, I would say aim higher. We have been in this gig a long time, since the 90s. We've had a gorgeous path of brilliance and not in that time. I came in 2005, and my learning really stems from some of the journey that I've had. Firstly, coming in as a person with a disability, severely profoundly deaf, but really not visibly so. My accent is gorgeous, or slightly confused at this time. And I didn't really self-ID. I told people I had hearing loss, not that I couldn't hear speech. And that created problems in the beginning, but it's also reflective of a lot of what we see with disability. And I think one of the key things that we really, really believe, and we're working hard on, is to see disability differently. It is a strength. It is an expertise. It is a talent. It is something that we absolutely want and need at Microsoft, and we're vehemently about that. So how you nurture your group of people with disabilities is incredibly important. Whether that's your employee resource group, which is really how I got into this. I joined the deaf group and then built the ERG at Microsoft and chaired that for the next 10 years. But also your champ communities of parents and allies and people just curious and interested about this space. Leveraging those talents is probably the biggest step difference that you can make in embedding it into culture, or at least that's what we found. I think the second learning is really embedding it into your system and your framework and your business. If you aren't managing accessibility like a business, then you're not going to be making the right business level decisions. That does mean managing and measuring it. It means strong frameworks with the leaders so they understand where you're at. And so I have a quarterly forum with the CEO and senior leadership team. We're very methodical in how we manage it across the business. In fact, I have a hub and spoke model. So my team of gorgeous experts are in the middle, but really they're not the important ones, although don't tell them that. It's every individual across the business and their teams that are driving Windows code or Xbox games or inclusion into HR policies and processes. And so we work in a hub and spoke, and we also work with the employee community and the champions communities at Microsoft to really just concentric circle this thing out and pull that expertise in. So it's really a system, it's a framework, it's a business. And then the last I'd say is you've really got to figure out how to motivate. I'm a firm believer that the carrot is much stronger than the stick. And I do have a stick. Compliance is clearly important, but compliance is also behind the law. The use of technology is behind the law. And so it's always important to aim for higher than that. And when I've got 145,000 nerds here at Microsoft to motivate, there's no bigger motivator than innovation. We're all a little magpie-ish. For the non-Brits in the room, that means we love bright, shiny objects. And so whether it's what we build ourselves, Seeing AI or Adaptive Controller, or in fact, one exciting piece today is that we're announcing availability of some new hardware through an amazing partner, Logitech, who have actually built some gorgeous box of switches and all manner of brilliant stuff that's going to empower folks using the adaptive controller to figure out how best to make that work for them. So your partner ecosystem as well is how can you innovate and take the bar higher every single time. And that's really the goal. We are not at a destination, we're on a journey, and I look forward to learning from each of you in the room. I will be watching the social media threads and catching up afterwards. And please just get us your feedback. If you've got ideas, if you've got things that you want to see, know that while I'm deaf, I am always there with an open ear. Have a great time, folks. I'm so sorry I'm not there, but I know you're going to have a blast. And have that cup of tea for me, will you? And maybe some Marmite.
Let's give Jenny a round of applause.
Except for the Marmite.
Except for the Marmite, yeah. Except for the Marmite, Christopher says. Okay. So there's a lot there we can unpack. And I want to do that throughout this conversation. But for introductions, I'd like to ask how y'all got into accessibility. And I'd like to know a little bit about the day in the life of an accessibility leader in the field. And I also want to know about, I hope these are the questions that y'all want to know.
Wow.
I also want to know about the first time, it could be big or small, that you left the office, you unplugged, maybe you put your hand down on the desk and you said, hey, we made something change today. Something happened within our organization, and I know I was a part of that, and my team was a part of that. Can y'all give me some thoughts on those? Who wants to go first? I can repeat. How'd you get into it, Jill?
So I came into accessibility through special education in Apple's education division, and I did not come in with a degree in special education or SLP, OT, any of that. I just came from a family of educators and ended up in by choice in Apple's education division. And when I got there, they gave me special education as part of my role. And at first, I was terrified because I felt like, if nothing else, these kids deserved someone who knew more about this and had that background. And but I took it on as I would any opportunity given to me at the company, and went to a bunch of schools and talked to teachers and administrators and worked with kids, and really quickly realized that it was the most important work that I was ever going to do. And so I just dove into it 150%, and after a while convinced Apple to let me do it more. It was a piece of my job, and I convinced them to let me do it full time and to really embrace it. And then that led to going back to product marketing at Apple to be the product manager across everything that we make, and then from there into the role that I'm in right now, which is more holistically accessibility across everything that Apple does. So I kind of lucked into it in a lot of ways, and I feel incredibly grateful that I did, because it is work that I truly passionately love.
But it sounds like you actually made your job. I mean, you advocated and you made your job.
And I think in a lot of ways, I feel blessed that Apple's the kind of company that you can do that they do see people's passion and let them run with it. But yeah, I was lucky that I was able to find this and build on it and be effective in it, in kind of even in some of what Jenny was saying about motivating people. That's such a huge part of what we all do when we come from companies that are as big as they are, and being that voice for a community, and then growing that and getting it to a point where you're not just one person in the education division talking about education or special education, you become, you build an army and you build
spread it out.
advocates all over. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't quite remember what your second question was.
Well,
but I know
so what about pinpointing something that really the first time maybe that really stuck with you? You went home and you were like, wow, I'm on the right track.
Yeah, I think within this realm, I had been doing product marketing for Apple prior to joining the education division, so I kind of had a bit of a background in it. But I remember very early on working in the education division, I happened to be talking with one of our engineers for the accessibility team, and I was talking to him about the work they were doing on text-to-speech and mentioned you should do word-by-word highlighting. And I remember him kind of looking at me going, I don't understand why. What does that mean? And I talked to him about the sort of multimodality and the power that can have, for so many different types of students, ranging everything from, students with dyslexia to second language learners to, all kinds of, whether it be about accessibility per se or not. And I remember him kind of looking at me and going, okay, and ending the conversation. And then about, 6 months later, launching text-to-speech and having word-by-word highlighting in there. And that moment of knowing a simple conversation, a single idea, could make it into 1 billion devices. And the power of when you really think through a lot of the accessibility features, how that isn't just it may be originally a single feature for one student because it's going to benefit that one student, but when you put it into 1 billion devices, you can really make huge changes in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Yeah. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone. So I'm Paul. I'm a digital accessibility head for Barclays. I'm a disability sector champion for UK government, and I'm involved in a number of disability charities. So it's quite useful looking at accessibility through a lens of business, of government, and of really that voice of disabled customer. I think really how I got into this, going back 10 years, very similar story to Jenny. I was a visually impaired accountant, nerd in a different type of way. And, helping set up our disability staff networks, employee resource groups, whatever we want to call them, and finding that far more worthwhile and valuable than the day job. So setting that up. And then, after time, having a number of issues, really, challenges in using our inaccessible internal systems, not being able to do my job. And a chance encounter with the head of IT at the time, and I was explaining this to him of, look, I'm thinking of quitting, and his challenge was, well, if you want things to change, you got to change. You want things to be better, you got to be better, and you're the ideal person for the job. And I kind of thought about this. Did I want to be visually impaired, blind Paul, sort of the disability guy, doing the disability role? Would it be the kind of only role I could do? And the more I thought what it would take to do it well, that kind of resourcefulness and resilience, or the sort of positivity and pragmatism, I kind of realised that lived experience, it wasn't the only role I could do, but the role only I could do as someone with a disability to do it justice. And since then, we've, made sure our digital bank works for millions of customers. We've ensured that tens of thousands of colleagues with disabilities can get the help and support they need, sort of workplace adjustments, and really told our story of accessibility to thousands of businesses to sort of shift their view. So that ecosystem point, it's not just what we do in our organisation, but more broadly, is so powerful. And I think from an accessibility leader perspective, there's a real subtle shift in the last 2-3 years. You might have seen it or felt it, that when businesses talk about we've released a product for disabled folks, it's now less about what they've done, but how they've done it. So if it's, the Xbox Adaptive Controller, we've done this by partnering with all these people. It's not just for disabled people, but by and with, and that's so valuable. The Project Euphonia, the Google stuff, ensuring that everyone's voice is heard. Again, incredible stuff. And again, Apple, the sort of voice control, it's more about that consultative, about being by, with, and for disabled people. And again, really important around consultation. I think in terms of accessibility leader, let's be clear, right? We might have this in a title, but many of you people in the room are championing accessibility in your organisations. Leaders, it's just about, someone's actions and how you inspire, you empower, and how you ultimately serve and help to elevate others. I think the thing for me, the sort of what moments have stuck out for me, it's more where I get new members of staff joining the bank that come up to me out of the blue and say, I've joined Barclays because of your accessible services. So they've seen as a consumer the things we do, if it's talking ATMs or high-vis cards or secure messaging that works if you've got a hearing and speech impairment, whatever it might be, and they recognise that we value them, they share those values, they join, and that disabled talent is like rocket fuel to move our accessibility agenda forwards. So I think that's sort of one point. But I think for me, a lot of what it means to be an accessibility leader, it's about giving people a voice, it's about prioritisation, and it's about partnership. So, giving people a voice is really about calling bullshit when people say things can't be done, it's always been this way, or holding organisations to account when they think they're brilliant, keeping people honest and grounded. Prioritisation is really about accessibility at the end of the day, is ensuring that everyone can use everything, and that's really difficult, right? So we have to make some hard decisions over, do we fix that issue that helps this group of folks with an impairment or another group? Do we audit for today or do we train for tomorrow? Do we focus on supporting our colleagues or our customers? Do we get our own processes right, or do we figure out how we buy stuff from suppliers in an accessible way? And that's really tough. So it's about what do we do first? And then, the point of partnerships consultation, so important. And real quick, the sort of story that hit home a few weeks back that I had was, we got a complaint from a bank. So a retired GP lost most of his sight very recently and struggling, just overwhelmed, right, coming to terms with this. And the complaint came in about, how can we make sure that his banking was easier? So went out, spent some time with him, getting up to speed with, how does he cope with sight loss? How does he use some of his tech and Wizzy assistive tech to, check his emails, to voice call his children and to do his mobile banking? Really useful, kind of giving him a download, seeing some of the things that, weren't intuitive or usable for a newbie. And when we were done, he kind of got up and hugged me, and he said, are there other accessibility people out there? I had no idea this was a thing. And, he said, I want you to tell them that the work you do, it's urgent, it's important, it really matters. And I think sometimes we can get so lost by sort of checkpoints that have failed and not customers that we're failing. So, I came here today really just to sort of tell you, if you work in this accessibility field, that the work you do is urgent, it's important, that it really matters.
Yeah, there's so much there. You do hear the negative stuff a lot, right? That comes through the office a lot. But those things that stick out that are positive really keep sharing it. And I think that's something to definitely listen to. So thank you for that. Christopher?
I got into accessibility. I'm the newbie on stage. I've only been involved for about 5 years. And I got into it by screwing up. You only learn by mistakes, or as I do. I got buttonholed. So I was the lead TPM on Google Play Music at the time, before Google really had sort of made a commitment towards accessibility. And one of our test engineers came into our meeting, and she turned on voiceover. Yes, voiceover. And I heard button, 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 button. I said, what's that? And she said, this is Play Music for someone who's blind. I said, well, that's stupid. How do they use it? And she said, that's why I'm here. And that really, really affected me. I've been in the industry for almost 20 years by this time, 10 years at Apple, not in the lower levels in the operating system. Years at Sony, a year at Disney making games, even some years at Google, and I'd never heard of accessibility. Didn't even understand what it meant. And sort of this movie-ish 24 hours, I realized that everything that I had done was made without thought. And I realized I wanted to do something about it. So within a month, I took on a Google 20%, and I decided to lead accessibility for Google Play. And I hired her to teach me what I needed to know. Yes. So for me, the other part is, since I'm not of the community, I need to be more than humble. I need to be desperately seeking out information, making sure I understand what I don't understand, because I'm always going to have my own context. I'm always going to have the wrong ideas of how to solve problems, because I don't know the problems we're trying to solve. Yeah. So I hired her, and she taught me what I needed to know. And a couple years later, Eve Anderson, who's the director of accessibility, asked me to build a team on her team to help drive accessibility across all of Google. And I jumped at the chance. And to answer your question, the thing where I was the first time when I realized that we did something right in terms of accessibility is when that test engineer came up to me longer than it should have been, but a couple months later and said, hey, listen to this. And it was the actual labels. It was actually the buttons saying what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And for me, a music product, if you can't consume your music, it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
So that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, just reflecting on what you said also is hiring people that, you know, have different skills than you do, and being humble about that and being okay to ask for that, I think is pretty powerful too, like that. So, top down, bottom up approach regarding accessibility throughout the organization. Do you have just some thoughts on that that you could share? What is their best approach? You know, and just from your experience, what you've seen has worked either way.
I mean, I think for me, it's a bit of both. So to join this up with where we started today with Caroline, you know, this tectonic shift over the last year, the disability inclusion revolution of business leaders waking up and signing up to accessibility being a thing, of elevating the disability agenda, has been so powerful, because I think this point about businesses accelerating far quicker than government and society ever could is really so true. I think having senior business leaders who understand, buy in, support, sponsor, resource up some of the disability efforts is really key. But let's be clear too, we need passionate people, you know, who are empowered to actually change things, to improve things, to have the ideas of where the problems are, you know, go and work through and work with the disability community and others to figure out how can we improve. So for me, it's really a bit of both is kind of the secret sauce.
Thank you. So.
Yeah, I think you know, the answer to top down or bottom up or even carrot or stick or any of those is always yes. You know, it's all of the above. I don't think that, you know, well, it helps to have somebody in a higher level position who says this matters and who gets in front of an organization and says, you know, you need to take this seriously. But that doesn't really motivate people to actually do anything more than the base, because quite often they're also being told these 27 other things matter too. And the way that you get the mind share to get people to do something is to connect to them personally and get them to want to do this work. And so I think you have to look at multiple ways of reaching out to individuals and organizations, and getting a leader on your side is wonderful. But you know, I've found some of the more grassroots things that we've done around things like Global Accessibility Awareness Day to be, you know, just as impactful, or even in some cases far more impactful, when you can actually, you know, when you can get an engineer who starts off saying, oh, I don't need to know about this, I work on silicon, you know, I just make a chip somewhere. And then you pull them into showing them what we can do on our technology, and that person walks away understanding, I need to go keep innovating and making better chips, because what we're doing with those chips, the types of assistive technologies that run on those chips, is fantastic, and I want it to be more powerful. So I know what my piece is now as part of the accessibility army. You know, people ask me all the time, how many people are on your accessibility team? And my response is, I think we're at 150,000 employees, so my accessibility team is 150,000 people. You know, I want every single one of them to understand that regardless of what they do at Apple, there's an accessibility component to their jobs, and I want them to be proud of that.
That's nice. No. Yes.
I'm sorry, jet lag is just hitting. What was the question?
Top down.
Top down
Top
or
down,
bottom up.
But you know, motivation
Yes.
seems to be running a nice theme. So feel free to like.
I really resonate with Sarah's yes. You really need to have both. And I'm sorry for losing track. I was so engaged I forgot the question.
It's very engaging.
Yes. Oh, I love Sarah. It really is a top down and bottom up. But the bottom up, I think, is sort of how it often starts. And I think one of the most important things is, as you're engaging with these different teams, you need to learn to speak their language. You need to understand sort of what is the acronyms and who are the influencers inside there, because there's a difference between the org chart of decision makers and the people actually who do the influencing. And if you engage with a team, you start with your allies. You start with the people who understand the technology, and they can help you get some wins, and you build some momentum. and then you start getting the next level of support, and then eventually you need to get sort of the top level support, or else the prioritization conversation gets difficult. But I find starting at the bottom, at least at Google, is far easier than starting at the top.
Yeah.
Because without the wins, without the momentum, it's difficult to get the attention.
Yeah, very interesting. So a question just came in, and it's a tough question. And I want to ask it because I think it's important, but I want to rephrase it possibly. Let me see. So, what was the biggest mistake, and what did you learn about fixing it? How did you fix it? Maybe can you share something that you would have done differently, and be as specific or not? You know, kind of. It's like a total interview question.
I can go. Okay. I remember the question. This is great.
Right, okay, good. We'll go with you first from now on. Right?
Thank you. Oh, I don't need that. Coming on too hard. When you're passionate about something, and this is all that you think about, it's very difficult to realize that the other person doesn't have your context. So more than once, more than twice, I've come into a conversation with a bunch of acronyms, with a bunch of passion, and they weren't at the same level where I was. So I had to learn to sort of build up the conversation so they could be at that fever pitch where I live, and they can learn to understand why it's a passion and why it's important. So coming at it too hard with my own context without understanding where they're coming from, and it hurts the mission if you do that.
So what'd you do to change that?
Slow down.
Slow down.
Slow down, and build up the conversation to this. In this case, it was a senior VP. I had sort of a pre-work with his support team, understand how it would be best to tell the story. I sent some pre-work, some pre-videos, asking if they could take a look at it, so try to open the heart a little bit.
Yeah.
And that second time, it actually went much better.
That's great. Oh, thank you, Sharon.
I think I get a lot of what you're saying with that, because I think there's an element around understanding whether to come in with the carrot or the stick, or with what's the motivation of this other person, in order to get that kind of buy-in and get them moving forward. Because often you only get one shot with a lot of the upper management, and understanding what are the things that drive them can be really the key to actually having that kind of success. So.
Yeah, no, I think for me it's really around focus, really. It goes back to that point that accessibility is about trying to fix everything for everyone, and sometimes you can spread yourself too thin trying to do all of that, and then really thinking, well, how do we benchmark? What are the sorts of things that we would need to do to be a disability confident organisation, employer, for our tech to be accessible for everyone, and taking a bit more of a sort of structured approach to, if we can only do a few of these things, let's just pick 2 or 3 and do them well, and then let's move on to the others. So I know, we partner very closely with Business Disability Forum. They have an incredible benchmarking tool, completely free and open source, called the Accessibility Maturity Model, that we and 50 or so of biggest public and private sector organisations use, and we've just refreshed. And again, it really gives these kind of 10 things that you need to work on and work through to be good at accessibility. So I think in the early days it was trying to do everything, and I think now it provides a bit more of a structured, systematic approach to say, okay, well, let's use this to work through what are the key things we do now, and then what's next.
That's interesting. So this kind of ties right onto it. This is something about customer feedback, which I think was an interesting question that popped in. So obviously, does customer feedback help you drive change internally? And I would say yes for that. But how does it within your organizations? What's the process, the feedback that comes into the accessibility email that says, hey, this is happening? How do you make that change, and how do you shift it? And all the hurdles within that. It usually is, usually all. So, Chris, do you want to jump in?
You sure?
Go first.
Okay. I'll remember the question. The customer service is a relatively new function for disability within Google. It's launched this year. So what we've done is we've created several.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, could you repeat?
I remembered it this time.
I know, exactly.
You've got my back. Thank you.
It's that jet lag still.
Harry, no. The disability support is a reasonably new service, and we created this literally by interviewing like Sarah, our friends at Microsoft, and with this collaboration, we created this disability support team. And now through this, we actually have regular reports, or we're in the process of building the reports that allow us to understand what are the most important things that are coming in. We have our own email lists where we hear about things that are being broken, but the interesting challenge is making sure that the information we have coming is actionable. Mm-hmm. So you may hear someone complaining about it, and how do you talk with this person and make sure, is it a mistake? Is it our technology, or is it the way that they use technology? And once we're sure it's something inside our technology, then we bring it up with the teams. And usually it's a bug, but sometimes it's a feature that's working the way people don't expect. And then we bring that into the design team and make sure they understand how people are using the service or the application that we hadn't thought of. Mm-hmm. So we bring the voice of the user in as much as we possibly can.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the power of customer feedback. I think it's huge. And that's both from the positives and the negatives. You know, when you get in an email that says, I've hit a roadblock, you know, and this is what that means to me, you know, that this is, your technology, all of our technologies can be life-changing. And if someone reaches a point where they can't do something, and you can take that to somebody in any department and say, your app, the thing you're working on is fantastic, but it doesn't do X. And let me explain to you what that means to even just one human being out in the world, can be so powerful to have a team make a change. So I would encourage anybody who doesn't have a customer-facing way of communicating with your base to do so. And you know, you have to make a commitment to that. There, for us, and I know same with Google, we had talked with you guys when you did it, and Barclays as well. There's teams that have to support it. It's not even just a one person who now has that email address. You have to commit to actually taking in that feedback, communicating with your customers, and then using that feedback. But once you do, it's so important to be able to pass that on. And then often, you know, what I love is once the change gets made, I get to send the email back to that same person 6 months later from that customer saying, thank you. Yeah. And that matters. Yeah. And then you can create an accessibility advocate within your own company just through those two things for life. Mm-hmm. So I think it's hugely important to have that communication with your customers and make sure you're taking in everything good, bad, and ugly and figure it out.
Yeah. And the nice thing is it provides you the stories. Earlier today we heard about stories, how important stories are for bringing these things to life. Mm-hmm. So these email, these calls really make a difference in terms of making that connection, as you said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's that sort of you said, we did approach. I think for me, so speaking from Barclays first, having a multitude of ways that people can give you that feedback, so whether it's via sort of email, social media and so forth, and if they bother to take the time to say they've got a problem, then making sure that we engage and follow up and tell them what we've done about it, right? It's really, really important. So that, you know, a bad experience can often be, actually, we've done a thing, we think it's improved, does it work for you? Okay, great, and then, you know, you've got an ally. I think there's sitting back and waiting for people to give you feedback, as well as actually proactively going out to them and surveying folks and spending time with people with different access needs. And I think this point on customer feedback too, if I may, thinking about from a government side of things and public sector, I think there's a lot of time about, you know, carrots and sticks and regulations coming that mean public sector councils or colleges need to make sure that their sort of website's accessible now. You know, there's a lot more clarity over what's expected. So that's kind of on the supply side, you know, supply accessible websites. I think we still have a problem in the UK of making it really easy for disabled people, as they encounter barriers online, to actually let those organisations know. So, you know, I'm really keen, seeing this as an opportunity, that this new public sector regulations makes that clear of, if vision impaired Paul can't get my bins collected and I go to the council website and it's rubbish, then there is a kind of clear contact us first. If you're not being listened to, you know, formal complaint, contact the CEO of that organisation, and if you're still not being listened to, go to this government body. So there is that kind of escalation route, and I don't really think we've sort of had that today. I look at the US and you know, what's really changing, the laws are broadly the same in the UK and US. well, it's quite grey on what exactly is expected, but it's for to power the public of saying this isn't good enough and that suing and complaining. Maybe as British people we just need to get better at complaining to say actually this isn't good enough. And organisations, anyone in an organisation, just put yourself in the shoes. It's quite bizarre as accessibility people to think through, well actually if someone had a problem, let's actually track through how would they complain? Because for many organisations there's probably no routes. I mean, if that didn't work out, where would they then go to? And that escalation route. So I know there's a lot of work we've been doing and sharing this with Scope, AbilityNet and the major disability charities to put that advice out there and to really encourage disabled consumers to say what's working and what isn't. But I think we've got a long way to go in the UK.
Yeah, thank you.
It's not just the UK.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So here's a question that came in that's interesting. If this panel was your one shot on convincing someone of the importance of accessibility, what would you say? So what would you say is one shot?
I think for me it's that accessibility has a multitude of benefits. That law requires more, consumers expect more businesses waking up to the multitude of benefits, better customer experience, more happier customers, more productive colleagues, bolstering your brand and sort of mitigating risks. So it's very much kind of why wouldn't you do this, or you're going to be left out and left behind.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would look at it from the perspective of, stop approaching accessibility as a compliance issue and start approaching it as a creative challenge and a usability challenge, and making a better product. Because I think accessibility, when you really get into it, it's less about, oh, we're just going to solve one problem for one person, and more about you make a better product for everyone. Mm-hmm. And when you just think about the problem from a different perspective, you're going to improve your products overall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent.
For me, keying off on the statement I made earlier, trying to understand who I'm talking to, because there's a couple different ways you can go about it. You can go about it in terms of the inspiration. It's the right thing to do for the world. There's a billion people. There's the fear stick. There's the lawsuits, or there's the competition side. Well, our competitors are doing this, and we can do better. So it really, I know I'm copying out a little bit, but I really think it really depends on who you're talking to and what motivates them. Because from personal experience, if you do it wrong, it makes it harder. So I'd try to do some homework first to understand how do they get motivated, and then find the right combination of the three. Yeah,
that's great. So we've heard today, hire more people with disabilities. So as an accessibility leader in some pretty impressive companies, what are y'all doing to focus on that?
I mean, part of it is we make the products that get used by our own employees. Yeah. So I think there is a virtuous cycle that goes on in terms of hiring people with disabilities in the realm of nothing about us without us. Creates the assistive technologies that get built into our products. But by doing that, you then open things up so that someone can be hired into any job, any division, to do that using our assistive technology, and then they provide feedback on the assistive technologies we're building, and we make them to be better. So I think for us, a lot of it is really just trying to make sure that we're building great foundational assistive technology to help anybody who wants to work at Apple be able to do so, and then using that to keep growing and growing and growing the number of people we can hire because we're building great assistive technologies.
Excellent. Thank you.
Paul? Yeah, I think it starts with how you can change your workplace environment, the culture around disability inclusion and mental health, so that many of your existing colleagues who have disability and mental health conditions, again, feel comfortable to bring their whole selves to work and tell their stories and get involved as one thing. I think the bit about letting your products and accessible services speak for themselves and hiring more talent, clearly there's some technical things to look at your hiring processes and portals about how accessible are they, how flexible, and what's plan B if you struggle with the site. How do you put profiles of people out there to make it very clear that you're welcoming, and even this sort of point about what workplace adjustments, reasonable adjustments you need in the workplace versus in the application and interview setting, so that, again, it is a fair and level playing field. What is appropriate for disabled people to kind of ask for, so that they can kind of shine to show their disability as a strength and the skills that they bring. So again, lots of work to stretch our thinking over how we change, not just a standard single approach over how we hire and screen people, but again, making it a bit more flexible and a bit more welcoming.
I remember the question this time.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Google is reasonably new in this space, and a few years ago we created a group that we called AJAX, the Accessible Googler Experience. And the goal of this team is to make Google the best, most inclusive place to work with disabilities. And through this team, we've actually been able to instill a bunch of change. We have dedicated people focused on hiring, dedicated people focused in terms of internal our real estate section and people operations. And building up the infrastructure takes a long time. And focusing on that, because the more diverse the workplace you have, the easier it is to make an inclusive product. Mm-hmm. So we're working really hard to make sure that we have the infrastructure necessary so people with disabilities can be successful. Because the worst thing is you bring in someone and the tool chain isn't appropriate, and people don't want to work there, then they leave. So this is something we're actively working hard to make better as quickly as we can.
That's great. Excellent.
I think just following on from that, a final point from me is really certainly the younger generation of folks with disabilities. There's kind of higher expectations. I think as people get more comfortable with the accessibility goodness packed into their devices, they kind of expect it. So if you can do dark mode on this flavour of smartphone and that version, why can't you have it on an ATM? Why can't you have it on a self-service till? And likewise for disabled students coming from a school place and workplace, they have higher expectations over the kit they get and what they expect from it, which is kind of great, to kind of increase what we can offer.
Interesting, yeah. So here's a question. What is the biggest challenge to full digital inclusion in your organization?
These are the easy questions.
I know, this gets the most likes almost, it's other than the recruitment one. I'm going with the audience.
Okay.
I think I'm aware, speaking to lots of businesses and organisations, there's folks that are new to this, and they're kind of freaked out because it's trying to do everything and it's where to start. And sometimes they're so paralysed by fear that they just don't start anywhere. So there's, actually the kind of 80-20 rule of actually beginning and taking baby steps and focusing on a few things. I think for more sophisticated organisations that are more mature in their accessibility journey, I think some of the challenges are very much around not just how to do a sort of shiny new product over here, but everything that you change or build or buy. How do we make sure that we're considering accessibility, we're leaning into inclusive design to ensure it's a great experience for a greater number of people? So that's a far more challenging thing to do for our internal processes, for our procurement practices. I think one of the biggest challenges we still haven't quite cracked is again one about sort of metrics and how do we show value? How do we show that by doing all this effort, again, it helped these folks and kind of putting some numbers around that. So people talk about the ROI, and it shouldn't be led by the sort of return on investment, but it's certainly useful as folks do more and more in this space to sort of say, actually, by investing in being accessible, it helped these people in this much way so that sort of snowball effect. So I think those are some of the challenges, and let's not face it, just the sheer amount of pace of change as upgrades and updates happen, then maybe things might break, and how do we kind of make sure that we speedily correct things so the accessible features we have that we maintain them.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I think a lot of other companies do as well, is awareness amongst all of the base of employees. And I mean that in as engineers are coming out of university, are they getting an understanding of what accessibility is enough to start their job and make it a part of what they do? And I think, at Apple, one of the things we try and do from day one as you go through your new employee orientation is to talk about what our 6 core corporate values are, of which accessibility is one, and kind of get people indoctrinated over and over again in what that means. But, to give a plug to an organization or a program that Larry Goldberg, sitting in the second row there, started in the States, called Teach Access, which really looks at how do we get more computer science programs and engineering programs to incorporate accessibility as part of what they teach, so that it's a baseline of, if you're going to get a computer science degree, you shouldn't be able to graduate if you haven't been taught some of how to make whatever you're doing accessible. And so I think that just that general awareness of constantly trying to make sure that everybody who comes in to work on all the many things that we do know that that's a piece of what they should be working on.
Great.
And sort of dovetailing on that, the awareness at multiple levels of the organization, because the thing that for me is the hardest is sort of keeping the energy up and not burning out, because you're often having the same conversation every time a new person comes in at a high level of the organization. Oh, here we go again. Yeah. You have to have the same conversation. You have to remind them why it's important. You have to scare them into realizing it's important, whatever works for them. But keeping the energy up and keeping the optimism, because it can feel sort of like a wheel that you're constantly running on, but it's a really good wheel, and we're doing something that's really important. So it's hard. It's important to pace yourself in a way so you don't burn out, but you have enough energy there that you can push when you need to.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, good. So Teach Access, Larry, you want to raise your hand? Second row. So if you've got questions about Teach Access, definitely go to Larry. He's in the third row actually. So this has been really good. There's some really synergy going on, and I see themes, and motivation was one of those themes I've kept seeing. The comment that you just made, Christopher, about the fact that don't give up, keep going. The executive, leaders may change, and they will change, and you have to do it again and go all over again, is something to keep in mind. So inspiring leaders within your organization. These are the new people that are going to be focusing on accessibility. Can you give us some thoughts around that? Some key things that you do or you look for to pinpoint those new leaders? And it's not really more of a question. It's not really a question. It's more of just some thoughts around it. You know the people I'm talking about, right?
Inspiring future accessibility leaders. Yeah. It's an interesting one. I think we've often, with my team, we often sort of talk about people as to whether they sort of already inherently have that accessibility gene, that empathy gene that, so I think kind of you nurture into getting somebody to be a leader. But I think it really gets back to kind of figuring out, as Christopher's saying, what's the inherent motivation of someone? Yeah. How do you find that person that clearly just has that element about them that you can tell they want to do more, they want to do good in how they look at it. And it may be that they have a personal connection to all of this, or that it's just something that grabs them, but trying to figure out how to work with them and nurture that and get them to figure out how they then motivate people within their own organization, and getting their management to see the value of what they're bringing to their organization. And you kind of have to come at it from a couple of different angles, but I think there's ways to do it.
Excellent.
Paul, please.
I think the thing for me on business leaders and on accessibility leaders too, it's this sort of point of going beyond legal and compliance. And we've often talked about building this culture of inclusion. So getting away from accessibility being something legally you have to do, and to something that commercially and morally we want to do, and recognising what if culture is about, it dictates how a bunch of people in an organisation think, feel and act, then we need this three-pronged approach to how do we sort of educate heads for rational argument, how do we inspire hearts for personal storytelling, and how do we enable hands for kind of practical tools for the job. Leaders love badges and recognition, and aren't we sort of good over here? But if they understand the kind of compliance point and this whole carrots and sticks, if anything, it's not accessibility being sort of bureaucratic compliance for you have to do this checklist because you have to, because the law says. It's kind of getting beyond that to this, in my mind, sweet spot of kind of enthusiastic compliance. For everyone understands why accessibility matters, why we need to kind of meet a minimum level, but that this is a starting point. But actually it's going way above and beyond that around inclusive design to, make sure that everyone can use all our stuff.
Yeah. We're not quite as far that in our journey, but what we have that CHAMPS program. We've had one for many years, but something we did over the past 2 years is we sort of gamified it. We've turned it from accessibility CHAMPS to accessibility dojo, so using like a martial arts, and we have a belt system. And what we found is we actually get a lot more engagement by having this belt system because there's a clear path of what you have to do to be an accessibility black belt. And people just want to say, I'm an accessibility black belt. And if you're a black belt, you're a leader. You've earned it. You've earned your stripes. So providing an opportunity to sort of self-nominate and rise themselves in terms of education, in terms of presentation, in terms of skills, this has been really, really helpful for us. And our program is growing remarkably fast. I'm really impressed with what the team has done.
That's great. That's great. So one last question, because I know we're out of time. There's a question that came in about what did you want to be when you were younger?
I wanted to be a historian.
Historian?
Yeah. And then I wanted to be a singer.
A singer?
Yeah.
I want to be a singer too.
Yeah, it's
Rock
like
singer.
fun.
Oh, totally.
No, I was
But
an
you
opera
were
singer.
a singer.
Were you a singer?
Well, I was, but that was a long time ago. Now I just do lullabies and karaoke.
Lots of lullabies, yeah. Sarah?
Oh gosh, I don't know. There was a point I wanted to be a vet. I think I had a lot of those early childhood.
All
I
that
wanted
stuff.
to deal with kittens and puppies and all of that. But I think one thing I think I always wanted to do something that I thought mattered, and actually would have impact in the world. So.
Excellent. Yeah.
Gosh, I think for me, I probably want to be a racing car driver, and probably quite similar to Caroline. You know, the visual impairment thing didn't quite work out. Driven cars. I think there's one place in the UK you can drive crazy fast sports cars. It's like, I don't know, I think I got to about 150 miles an hour with someone screaming left, right a bit in my ear, which was an experience. But I think the key message from all of this, right, is people don't grow up saying, I want to be the accessibility thing. I think folks have kind of drifted into and kind of found their cause and their calling.
Excellent. This has been enlightening. Let's thank our panel. Thank you so much. This was great. Excellent.